and an IDO. So what a combination. Please welcome our last final keynote speaker.
Thank you so much. What an amazing and inspiring day this has been. I'm so excited to be a part of it. And as I was putting together my talk for this afternoon, I was thinking a little bit about what you might be thinking right now. And I thought, you might be wondering, who is this person? What is she going to be talking about? And what time is the cocktail hour? So I'm going to introduce myself a little bit and tell you about the story of how I came to food and design thinking. And I'll share a little bit about how I think design thinking can help us create a more connected future of food. And it's probably going to be about 25 minutes till cocktail, so they're coming. Reception, thank you. So, as Alice mentioned, I'm the CEO and founder of Food Tech Design. And that's an innovation company that uses design thinking to help companies innovate in the food and beverage space. I work together with my partner Miguel, who's here, who's an industrial designer, and I'm a food scientist. And we take our expertise along with design thinking to help those companies. But I also am adjunct faculty at UC Davis in the Department of Food Science and Technology, and I teach a pilot course there called Design Thinking for Food. It's a graduate level course. It's multidisciplinary, so there are students from many different departments, and I teach it with Professor Charlotte Biltikoff. She's a professor of American Studies as well as food science. So she really brings a cultural and a historical perspective of food to the class. And I bring design thinking and food science as well. So it's really at those intersections that we help students learn these techniques and tools to really become the future game changers for food systems challenges. And so the challenges that our students work on, for 2 years they've worked on food waste in a food service environment. We are pivoting this year. This fall, our students are going to be addressing food insecurity on campus, which we've heard from some speakers today is really of critical importance. And UC Davis is launching a basic needs center on June 14th. So we'll be collaborating with them, with the food pantry on campus, and a few other organizations. So really excited about bringing these tools to students at UC Davis. But my love of food started at a very young age. You can see I've always played with my food, even at age 1 with my first peanut butter sandwich. And my experience took me to a very traditional start. So I got my PhD in food science at UC Davis, and I began my career at General Mills in food product development, really understanding how to bring technologies and products to market at a large food company. I then pivoted and joined IDEO as the first scientist and the first food scientist. I spent over 9 years there, actually helping to build the food practice and build design thinking for food, and I co-led that studio there. So that's where I met Miguel and fell in love with design thinking as an amazing innovation process for food and beverage. But I wanted to talk a little bit about a personal story to kind of think about how design thinking can take us to a more connected future of food. So this is my son, Peter. He's 7 years old, and a couple weeks ago he said to my husband, to me, do I need to know how to cook? And so as a parent, first I was like, of course you do. And then I thought, maybe we've been door dashing a little too much right now. But I kept that all inside, and we had a really good conversation about where does food come from? How does food get to the table and to the supermarket? And ultimately we got to the right answer, yes, you need to cook. You need to learn to cook. And so I think it really brought up an interesting question, though, which is, what will the future of food look like for the next generations? And as we think about all of the emerging technology that's going on right now, we're really at the precipice of some interesting things. In the session right before, we heard a lot about these technologies, the connected kitchen, things like self-driving cars, how that might affect us personally in our transportation, but how that might affect the supply chain of our food system. The way food is farmed or fished or brought to life also is a really interesting emerging area with new startups and technologies in this space. And I think we've heard today that we are connected to food in so many ways. Many of us probably go to the farmer's market. Many of us probably know some of our local farmers or food purveyors. Some of us might actually enjoy the Food Network, an entire network, dedicated to food, or we might like cooking recipes, finding things on Pinterest, things like that. But in some ways, we're still quite isolated from food. How many people in the room work in agriculture or are farmers of some sort? A few, great. How many people in the room work in food manufacturing or food distribution? Great, awesome. How many people do both? Awesome, so one person, and this is a really elite group of leaders in food and beverage, and there's one person in the room that really probably has an awesome sense of the entire food system. If we think about consumers, they're going to have even less experience than we do in really understanding the complex food system. And now we have some really awesome ways to get food where we press a button on our phone and it arrives at our door, which is amazing in some ways, but also still separating us from sort of the process making and gathering of food. And so that's where I want to introduce this idea of design thinking. Design thinking is a tool to help make our future food even more connected. How many folks in the room are familiar with design thinking? Good, a healthy amount. Awesome. I think this slide, for those of you who might not be, this slide really captures it in a very distinct way. It's pretty much make things that people need and want, do it in a way that is feasible, so it's possible to manufacture, and do it in a way that can sustain your business. So it's really those three things. The most important thing is to start with people. And I'd say the other important thing is to do all three of these at the same time. So it's really taking all of them into consideration. At UC Davis, when we teach our course, we often think of the 4 phases of design thinking. The first one really being about insight and inspiration. And that's where we have students gather observations, we collect stories, and we get inspired. And then we synthesize that, we strategize into insights and opportunity areas. We spend time designing and prototyping. Sometimes we even do that in the beginning phases, but we certainly commit a phase to designing and prototyping, and ideas come out of that. And then finally, we dedicate time to communication and storytelling, whether that takes the form of a presentation or a website or a video. But those are generally the 4 phases that design thinking addresses. So what I want to talk about today is 5 ways that design thinking can change the future of food, and I'll pull from some of those phases to help us have an even more connected future. So the first one is about building empathy, and you might think, why is it so important to build empathy? What's the value in that? And really, having empathy helps us to design meaningful solutions, to do things that people are actually going to adopt or embrace into their lives. There's no shortage of options when it comes to food and beverage solutions. It's finding something that's really relevant and meaningful. And one of the ways we do this is we actually observe in context. We listen to what people say. We watch what they do. But we go one level deeper. We actually ask the question, what are they thinking? How are they feeling? How can we truly understand what's going on and why people are doing and saying the things that they do? What's truly important to them? And so an example of this is in the class with students that I teach, especially the last 2 years where we focused on food waste. We've conducted design research in the early stages of the class, and we've spent time with people in context. And so what that's meant is our students going to the dining commons and actually eating a meal. At UC Davis, most people eat in the dining commons are first-year students, so many of our graduate students aren't as familiar with the UC Davis dining system. We ask them to get to know students, to talk to students that are already addressing food waste, to talk to the staff that are dealing with food waste, from the people that are planning and procuring food, to people that are actually washing the dishes, serving the food, maybe even at the checkout, seeing kind of all through the system what's going on there, what are the opportunities. And of course, the truth comes out. One of the big truths that we saw is that food waste is very important to students, especially this generation of students. It's important, but it's not always the priority. So imagine you're a first-year freshman at UC Davis. Anyone want to take a guess on what one of the biggest priorities they have when they go to the dining commons? Feel free to yell it out. Take a guess.
Friends.
Cost, time, friends. Any others? Say it again. Gaining weight. Those are all excellent. Those are all important. One of the biggest things that I'm thinking about that really has food waste implications is finding something to eat that they like. It is so obvious. It is so basic. Because if you pick something up to eat that you don't like, it often turns into food waste. And if you are an international student, that actually is also a particular need for you that we heard from students. So interesting to think about what some of the inherent needs are and how to sort of add to that, add on to the needs of food waste to it. But that's one of the ones that came out. The other thing that came out is the beginning of the quarter, especially fall quarter. Behaviors are a little bit different. Your first time in the dining commons, it's like Disneyland. There are all these things to eat, there are all these things to try. 4 weeks later, been there, done that. So maybe you're not taking food in the same way. During finals week, there's certainly some stress going on and food waste peaks at that. So interesting to think about these opportunities as a place for design. So you might be saying to yourself, great, this is great. I'm not a market researcher, I'm not a consumer expert, so how am I going to build empathy if I'm not interviewing people in context? So a couple things you can do. One is to walk in the shoes of your consumer. So recently we worked on a project around dinner time, and this is what people on the internet are doing on food blogs. They're making these sheet pan dinners where they cook everything on one pan. And we could have read about it and said, oh, that's interesting. But we actually decided to do it. So we waited till 5 o'clock when it was actually dinner time, made this recipe, and discovered some real things. One of the real benefits of this recipe is everything comes out of the oven at once. And that's not what people were necessarily saying in blogs, but by doing it firsthand, that gave us some empathy for what it's like to get dinner together and what some opportunities might be. It's also good to do a little me search with friends and family. If you're working on a project about healthy snacks for kids and you don't have any kids, might be good to hang out with somebody who does, maybe a friend or a family member. Or if you're designing healthy meals for seniors and you're not a senior, maybe spend some time with your parents or your grandparents. Anything to sort of get in the mindset and the space of how you might understand what's going on in their lives. As design thinkers, we love to look out into the world for inspiration and insight, like this rainbow toast right here, kind of a fun, quirky trend. We often check out places or people where extreme behaviors are happening. So again, back to our food waste class, they were inspired by Itza. How many people have been to Itza? Okay, a few. So at Itza, you order on an iPad, you don't interact with anyone, you get your very customized vegetarian bowl from an automated sort of digital vending machine. Super interesting, super unique, really inspiring for our students as they're thinking about customization in the dining commons. Or where other unique solutions already exist, this is Disneyland. If anyone's been to Disneyland lately, you can get a fast pass, which tells you when to come back in line. We had students really interested about standing in line and how that can affect your food choices and ultimately food waste in the dining commons. At peak hours, there are long lines. So, second thing I wanted to talk about, design thinking really gathers diverse perspectives to frame the problem, and it does it for design, which is a really key element. It's not just learning for learning's sake, it's learning knowing that you have to pick a solution on the other side. And when you go into a problem knowing that, it really changes your intent around your research. As I mentioned in our class, we have multidisciplinary teams. So we have students from design, from food science, from English, from geography, from engineering. We had an MBA student last year. Really different ways of looking at the problem. And from that, they're able to create opportunity areas that are intentional for designing solutions. This is one of our teams up here. This team actually was really interested in looking at the part where you put your dishes in the dish return. And at UC Davis, you don't scrape your plate. You just put it on a belt and it goes sort of mysteriously away. So they were interested in understanding the behaviors that were going on there, but also understanding the equipment and the informational output. We had other students down here that were interested in the moment of choice. What helps people to choose and figure out what they like or not like? What kinds of information are available for people at that moment of choice? So very different sort of takes on the same problem. And we did the same problem 2 years in a row. We had absolutely totally different solutions and opportunity areas. We love to think of our students as being T-shaped, having breadth of experience and depth. So in my case, my depth is in food science and in design thinking. My colleague Charlotte, her depth is in food studies and sort of the history and culture of food. But we both share common traits. We're both collaborative, we're human-centered, we're generative, and most importantly, we're optimistic about the challenge. And so these are things that we like to really instill in our students and instill in anyone that becomes a design thinker. how many folks in the room are scientists or engineers? A few, me too. Awesome. Well, I think this idea of becoming a human-centered scientist or a human-centered engineer is really important. If we can add that breadth to what we do, then we can create technologies and solutions that are even more meaningful and relevant. So I'll move along to number 3. Design thinking uses rough and rapid prototypes to build to think. And so often people make a prototype when they know what their idea is. They figured it out. Maybe it's a food idea, maybe it's 3 or 4 flavors, it goes in this package. And actually, design thinking sort of flips this idea of prototyping when you know the idea to doing it to help you to figure out the idea. So it's this idea of using a rough and rapid prototype to develop an idea, not just to produce them. So you can see here, rapid prototyping can really accelerate development. You can see this very high-tech virtual reality device was probably made with not very much money, not very much time, but it does allow you to answer interesting questions. It allows you to answer contextual questions. Is this the right idea? How do people feel about using this? And if it's not the right idea, it gives you the opportunity to pivot without having wasted a lot of time or a lot of money, or without having become emotionally attached to the idea that you don't want to pivot because you spent so much time and so much money on it. Consumers also love rough and rapid prototypes. It helps them give iterative feedback instead of just validated feedback. So helping you make an idea better versus telling you if they love it or hate it. So what does a rough and rapid prototype look like for food and beverage ideas or products or services? Well, one is it doesn't have to be edible. And actually, if it's an early idea, it shouldn't be edible. We find that the level of fidelity for the prototype should match where you are in the process of innovation. So if you have a really early idea, it should be rough. If you have a really finished idea, it should be more refined. If you have too refined of a prototype when the idea is still early, people sometimes fall in love with it and they run too fast with it and you don't have time to really think it through. In this case, with this little Play-Doh prototype right here, you can ask a lot of questions. You can say, hey, what size is this? Is this enough food? Where would I put this in my fridge or in my lunchbox? You can get into contextual questions. How does mom feel about putting this or giving this to their kids? What about this would make her feel better? What might kids like? All sorts of good things that you can ask and learn about early on. So I want to play a little game. I want to show some rough and rapid prototypes, and I want to see if you can guess what they are. Some of them are food related and some of them are not. So anyone want to take a guess at this rough and rapid prototype? Delivery. It's a food delivery system. You can see this great iPad and iPhone there, and instead of writing software or even faking a screen in a graphic design program, they just literally scribbled it out, and there's a little scene of what's happening. A meal kit, yeah, like a Blue Apron or a Good Eggs kit. You can learn so much from this. You can see the recipe card. In this case, they actually just printed pictures of the food to scale. So you can see which sides need to be refrigerated, which sides need to be shelf stable, how big is too big, how much ice do we need in here, or what kind of insulation. Lots of questions can be asked and answered. This is a classic one. It's not a laser pointer, good guess. Would you say smoking gun? Any other ones? This is a real example. This is a tool for sinus surgery. And you can see that's the actual tool. This prototype was shown to surgeons, and it's really simple. It's a film canister, so it tells you how old it is, a dry erase marker and a clip. But from this, you can have a conversation with surgeons about what the kind of grip is needed to perform this complicated surgery. How about this one? Looks like a box.
Is it a home?
It's a home design. It's a workspace design. It's actually a workspace design with private areas for offices, more of a conference area. It is probably the cheapest prototype that was made in this set. A toaster that toasts little fun faces on there. Maybe shows you if you're over toasting your bread. How about this one? Grinder, salt and pepper. fun. It's a blender. It's an immersion blender. It's 3 different prototypes of immersion blenders with different grips, different button placements. And what I love about this prototype is they're actually showing it in context. You get so much value even making something rough and bringing it into the context of what you might use. So as you evolve and iterate, prototypes are going to become more refined and they're going to get to higher fidelity. You can see the post-it brainstorm idea and the early prototype. Anyone know what this is?
Steering wheel.
It's a steering wheel for a car. So when the idea got really refined, here is a very expensive, nice prototype version of that. So the idea is to fail early so you can succeed sooner, and that's something that Tom Kelly of IDEO, definitely a phrase that he mentioned that we really believe in. So number 4, design thinking creates space to iterate. And this is so important because iteration is about taking an idea from good to great. This is one of our teams up here that actually was initially interested in those peak moments where the lines were really long. And once they started to ideate and build in that space, they really realized that the opportunity was before you even got in line. And so they came up with this idea called Choose, which was a sampling system, a way for you to sample what you might like so you know which line to get into. So they needed time to kind of iterate and build that out even though they had a strong opportunity area to start. It can lead to surprising pivots and breakthrough ideas. So this team up here started out thinking about this salad bar as an interesting place for food waste, an interesting opportunity. And once they started to build out the prototypes, they realized that the opportunity is really in helping people understand and account for what they're choosing nutritionally as well as food waste-wise. So they ended up building out a software program that actually turns the cafeteria into more of a learning lab and a self-learning lab to learn about what your choices are and how they impact your health and food waste. So I'll just do one more example here of why I think design thinking can help for a connected food future, and that's about storytelling. I think today we've heard about some amazing technologies and experiences and services. And we're seeing that this research and technology can help solve some of our most complex problems. So everything from the awesome research done here at Stanford around prebiotics and probiotics, thinking about plant-based alternatives in the meat space, the way we're fishing or not fishing our oceans, personalized nutrition, and more. And all of these things are really fascinating, really interesting, have the potential to solve problems. But they can be in tension with people's needs and desires to really understand their food, to understand what they're putting into their bodies. And so we need storytelling even more than ever to help people really make good choices and to understand what some of these new experiences can mean for them. So storytelling is really about connecting with your audience. It's not about shoving information. It's not about education. It's not about PR. It's about truly having a dialogue. And so in the case of our students, they really needed to think about telling their story to other students who might use these ideas, to the staff that actually participated in serving and creating the food, to the people who were planning and spending the money on what was bought. So I think the question that we pose to our students that I pose to you is, how might we tell compelling stories about food in a human-centered way? Whether that's a pitch that you're making to investors, or it's copy on the package that you're creating for your product, or it's a story about your company and what you're doing. And so the first thing I would say is take a moment and think about what your audience is thinking. And so one exercise we do with our students is, of course, we have them outline their story, which probably everybody in this room does. We then have a second set of Post-its that go along with, in this case for our students, often a slideshow or a presentation or a video. What is your audience thinking? What do they need to know? What are the burning questions they have? As you're presenting information A, how are they responding to it? And even more so, how are they feeling? Are they excited? Are they bored? Are they worried? And what's the right arc that's supposed to go for your story? Should it be a moment of posing a question and having people not be sure about how you're going to answer it, and then this tremendous relief when you do? When we think of other storytellers, there are often arcs to stories. Sometimes it's a comedy, sometimes it's a tragedy. Typically we like to end on the up part. But think about how people are feeling along the way. So I want to show an example, an inspiring example that we show our students about how you might talk about food or tell a story related to food in a very compelling way. And so this is actually by the Ad Council, and it's called The Extraordinary Life and Times of the Strawberry.
Oh, my sweet baby. You mean everything to me. I love
Can we get strawberries? No, honey. Please? Okay.
So that story ended on a little bit of a sad note. I was secretly hoping that the lime and the strawberries would reunite in the compost bin, but it didn't happen. But it's a really interesting way to deliver a message around food waste, some facts and figures. They told us, and they actually showed us all of the transportation, the energy, the water that went into making that strawberry, and they personified the strawberry in a way that I think drew everybody in. So really interesting to think about how you might create your story and what responses, what questions you might be answering, how you might sort of create an engaging and compelling way to connect with people. So I want to wrap up this talk by saying designing the future of food is absolutely about the food. It's about the experience, it's about the product or service you're creating. But it's also about the people. It's about the people who make the food, it's about the people who sell the food, the people that eat the food. And I think if we're going to have truly a connected food future, we need to do this. Design thinking is one of the tools that does it well. And so with that, I want to say thank you.
Now, Lauren says that she can stay for a few minutes during the reception. So we're going to do the Q&A during the reception since we're running late. I want to thank all of the speakers, the panelists, the moderators of the panelists. They were awesome. So please welcome them back and thank them. And then all of you for asking such brilliant questions. And next, I want to thank the amazing So Kim.
I just want to thank our sponsors. We couldn't feed you without your sponsorship, generosity, and you're feeding amazing food.